Hello, welcome back to Radio Free Gastonia, the internet's, um, I last time I checked, 27th most beloved source for unreliable but hopefully mildly interesting historical content. Um, Here today, we're still thinking about the Gilded Age and going into the progressive era of the early 20th century. So I just wanted to go over some of these points and record this video for your future reference. So we were talking about this sort of very, what I kept calling big picture. And this, it's trying to get us to the 20th century. This class is called US in the 20th century, but just thinking about like how the United States began as 13 colonies clinging to the east coast of the United States, and gradually expanded and gobbled up more territory. Uh, the Louisiana Purchase of 1803 and the Mexican-American War of the 1840s, and then going forward to create this big, huge country. I mean, a lot of this was premised on the concept of manifest destiny, and this illusion that this whole big place was a blank canvas. It was there for the taking. Of course, that um, there's some Native Americans who might disagree with that, but so I wanted to talk about last time, just like with these new technologies, like the telegraph, telephone, sound recording. Once you get into the 1880s and the beginning of the 20th century, there's all these new things. There's movies, there's cars. Like this is, and you're able to develop a big national market for all types of commodities and goods and whatnot. So that's kind of where I wanted us to begin, because this westward expansion was facilitated by the U.S. government. It took land from Native Americans and gave it out to American citizens who could just move to the plains and have their own little piece of heaven. Well, it wasn't always so fantastic. And this is what really happened in the 1890s. This is where we left off last time, which is that, yeah, getting a bunch of free land, free real estate sounds great. But, those parts of the Midwest and Western United States had never been subjected to intensive cultivation of agriculture. The plains in particular, where a lot of the homesteaders went, so like Nebraska, Iowa, the Dakotas, etc., were not like that great for farming, actually. And we'll see once we get to the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, that it becomes an ecological catastrophe that like destroys people's lives by the time you get to the 1930s. But these problems were already happening in the 1890s. This is when you have the People's Party or the Populist Party, which emerges as like a third party to challenge both the Republicans and Democrats. This gets complicated, but the People's Party in the 1890s is trying to advocate for these industrial workers who have very few protections and, working extremely long hours, 6-7 days a week. No safety in the workplace. We're going to talk about that quite a bit more. And also these farmers who realize that like they're getting screwed by the banks, they're getting screwed by the railroads. You can have your nice little slice of heaven out there in Nebraska. You still have to be able to get your produce to market, and there's not like 2 railroads in your like area. You kind of have to pay whatever the railroads want to charge you, and then as a farmer, you're almost always taking out money as a loan from a bank or a merchant at the beginning of the growing season. And then when you finish with your wheat or cotton or indigo or whatever it is that you're growing, um, you hopefully sell it for a profit, and then you're able to pay back the loan, the debt that allowed you to buy the seeds and the fertilizer and the implements and tools to grow that crop. What a lot of these farmers realize is that I'm always falling behind. This is true of homesteaders out in the Midwest and West. It's true of sharecroppers and tenant farmers in the South, both black and white farmers who basically are growing. They're like renting land from a big landowner who used to be a slave owner, basically. Um, and they're growing more and more, but they're falling farther and farther and farther behind. And they are like, this sucks. Like, why should all these guys in Chicago and New York be getting rich off of us, and we go deeper and deeper in debt? So this is where the People's Party comes in, the populists. And they wage, several campaigns in the 1890s, 1892, 1896, with this radical alternative to both the Republicans and Democrats. It gets a little hard to explain, but like the populists kind of team up with the Democrats in 1896. This is William Jennings Bryan, the Cross of Gold speech. Bryan is this, he he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, I would say, personally. But, he is arguing that the cities won't run without the countryside. Like we grow the crops, like the whole system is based on us. Like if you didn't have us, you wouldn't have anything to eat, you wouldn't have clothes to wear. Um, in 1896, the Democrat populist coalition gets absolutely iced, gets totally just crushed by William McKinley, who's the Republican nominee, who's standing up for big business, tradition, responsibility, old timey values, and these Democrats and populists are kind of like crazy. They're like anarchists. They're radical. They're communists. That's not necessarily true, but that's the way it was perceived at the time. So McKinley wins big in 1896 and again in 1900. What I really want to stress here is that particularly in the South, there was a very strong sense that the populist movement was a big threat to the status quo, to the big landowners who, and business interests that ran the South after the Civil War and Reconstruction. So in places like Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Black men got the right to vote. They were elected. I mean, after the late 1860s, when slavery was abolished, when people, well, at this time, not women, but all men got the right to vote through these constitutional amendments. So there were, Black guys that were senators and representatives that they had been considered somebody else's property like a few years before, and now they're like serving on juries and holding elected office. This is the period of Reconstruction in the 1860s and 1870s. The powers that be really want to get back to about as close of a approximation of slavery as possible. So I'm talking about the white sort of grandees, the former plantation owners. It doesn't happen all at once, though. That's the thing that I think people kind of forget, is that it's not like, oh, Reconstruction ended in 1876, 1877, and all of immediately Black people lost all their rights in the South, and everything went totally into Jim Crow right away. No, that's not what happened. It was a slow process. People had won rights, and they weren't willing to just give them up. So it was through the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s there are these pitched battles between the Klan and the Democratic Party of the South, which at this time is the party of white supremacy. The Republican Party is still associated with Lincoln, the great emancipator, being against slavery and whatnot, and trying to uphold the rights of these newly enfranchised voters in places like South Carolina. Um, so the allegiances of Black Americans, by and large, will shift toward the Democratic Party in like the 1930s, 1940s. But at this time, it's still the Republican Party is still the party of Lincoln. And so you get all these like weird alliances, like the populists team up with the Democrats with Bryan, but they also ally themselves with Republicans in certain places like North Carolina because the Republicans are the party that's out of power. The Democrats try to take over as much as they can and roll back the advances of equal rights for Black Americans. So this what I'm driving at here is that by the time you get to the 1890s, it's clear that if poor white people in the South and Black people in the South got together and organized and like actually made a united front, a biracial, multiracial united front, they could actually change the way things work in the South and threaten the power of the traditional elite. This, I think, is most dramatically, I mean, there's many examples, most dramatically shown in Wilmington, North Carolina, a beach city, major shipping port, where a biracial Republican populist alliance wins an election. I think it's 1890. This all goes down in 1898, throwing out the white Democrats that had been in power before. And we're going to talk about this in more depth, but the broad outlines are there's a coup d'état. The government of the city of Wilmington is overthrown, and the Black newspaper press building is burnt down. The mayor is overthrown. The city council is overthrown and replaced with loyal white supremacist Democrats. It's crazy. Like people, like Black people in Wilmington had to like flee into like the swamps just to avoid like getting murdered. Um, and that's, part of the reason why we get Jim Crow. Jim Crow is the whole system of segregation and racist policies that were meant to keep Black people from voting or having equal civil rights, political, legal rights, but also to segregate society so that there's a black water fountain and a white water fountain, or as they would have said back then, colored. And it's this whole regime that gradually comes into place. It doesn't happen all at once, like I just mentioned earlier. By 1900, it's pretty much in place, but it took a long time. And they wanted to take the vote away from not just Black people, but poor whites too, really. So you have poll taxes, which means you have to pay to be able to vote. You've got these things called literacy tests, which are like a total scam. That's like a local registrar or magistrate will have you like basically write an essay question to show whether you understand what the Constitution is. If you've seen the movie Selma, there's the early scene where a character played by Oprah Winfrey tries to go, she's a Black woman who's trying to go register to vote in Alabama. And the guy's like, well, can you name all 93 local magistrates in every county in Alabama? And it's like, this whole thing is designed to make sure that you can't vote. And if you're poor, then you can't pay the poll tax. There is this thing called a grandfather clause, which was kind of designed to give a backdoor for poor whites to be able to vote, which basically just said, if your grandfather was able to vote in 1860, then you can vote, which is another way of saying, like, if you're white, you can vote. So, but this system comes into place because there's the landowning class that used to be slave owners and plantation owners, and there's the new business class of places like Atlanta who are very threatened by the idea that white and black people might actually get together and try to change things. And they want to drive a wedge into that, and they're quite successful. Um, there's a thing, W.E.B. Du Bois, a great historian and sociologist, one of the great intellectuals in American history, um, talked about the idea of a psychic wage. A psychic wage. Now, this is another way of saying bullshit, but basically, it's the idea that you might be poor and you might be white. You might be a poor white guy who doesn't have two of anything. Um, but even if you're at the very bottom of the totem pole or the ladder in white society, at least you're not black. So you're not getting paid an actual wage of currency, like money that allows you to have a life and pay for things, but you're getting some kind of benefit psychologically from the fact that the black patrons have to sit in this other part of the movie theater that's the less nice part. And I, as a white man or white woman, am able to sit in the nicer part. Or if, lo and behold, maybe if you're Rosa Parks, a while down the road, we're going to get to in the 1950s, you would have to give up your seat to a white person, which makes the white person feel like they're more important. And that's what Du Bois meant by a psychic wage. So this Jim Crow system comes into being across the South. I should stress also, people always think the South is so bad. The rest of the country was very segregated too. Whether you're talking about LA or Chicago, or you might have heard of the concept of sundown towns. If you were black, you were not supposed to be here after 8 p.m. or you will get killed. And that was true in places like Oregon and Illinois. So it's not just a Southern thing. It was really scary. Even Martin Luther King Jr. Said when he took his campaign to Chicago, he was like, "Oh my God, wow, this is these people are actually scarier than the some of the racists in the South that he was fighting against." So this whole legal regime comes about, and that's one of the things that is so perplexing about our topic today, because going from Gilded to progressive, going from the Gilded Age of the robber barons, of just massive exploitation of workers and the poor, and horrible slums and tenements and all that, to the progressive era, where a lot of activists and journalists and writers and politicians were trying to reform society, make the cities safer, cleaner, pass some laws that would help workers have some kind of protections or rights in these ghoulish factories where they're working. The progressive era is kind of the time, from about 1900 to 1920, when we're acknowledging that there are some problems in this rapidly diversifying, rapidly industrializing, rapidly urbanizing America. Maybe we need to have some laws that the corned beef that you get in a can is not mostly made of sawdust. Or so you create things like the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. If your cousin Otto gets his arm chopped off in a press or a lathe in a factory, that maybe he should be entitled to some compensation by the owner of the factory, and not just kicked to the curb and have his family starve to death in a ditch. this is the time of Upton Sinclair, who wrote the novel The Jungle, which is all about how disgusting all the meatpacking factories were and how dangerous and just awful, like the food people were getting, also like the lives of the workers. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, where all these mostly young women, just died in a horrible fire because they were locked into this factory, where this basically sweatshop where they were working. So in some ways, you would say, oh, well, the progressive era, that's the nice time when we're trying to like fix some of these problems. But it's impossible to separate the fact that, like, particularly in the South, Jim Crow was part of the progressive era. It disenfranchised Black men. Of course, women didn't have the right to vote until like 1920, but like there's this disenfranchisement, there's this enforcement of segregation, notably with the case of Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896. This was a test case. We're going to see this over and over again in American history, where activists or lawyers or whoever want to test the court system and see what will happen. Rosa Parks did this later on. We'll see this in other circumstances. Like these new laws saying there's a white part of the bus and a black part of the bus, or a white train car and a black train car in Louisiana. So Homer Plessy, is the, sort of volunteers to be the test case about like whether it's okay for train cars to be racially segregated. This really sucks, by the way. This goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And in one of, I think most historians and legal scholars would say one of the worst decisions in American history, the Supreme Court says, yeah, it's actually fine for public accommodations facilities to be racially segregated, because you can have a black school and a white school. As long as they're equally good, there's no problem. You can have a white train car and a black train car, or a colored water fountain and a white water fountain. As long as they're equally good, then that doesn't actually violate the Constitution. It doesn't violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, anybody with a brain in their head will recognize that, A, the point of laws like this is to enforce a sense of inferiority on people. That's like the symbolic thing, the psychological thing I was talking about earlier. And B, that like obviously the black school or the Mexican kids school is not going to be as nice as the white school. It's just, I mean, we're going to look at lots of images of these. Just, I mean, it's obvious. These laws are meant to humiliate people. And there's no way that these accommodations will be equal if they're racially segregated by law. This is the idea of separate but equal. Justice Harlan had a rip-roaring dissent in this Supreme Court case, but this became the law of the land until like 1954. So, we're going to talk about this idea of the long civil rights movement. So it's not just like, oh, it's Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks in the 50s or 60s. No, this civil rights movement had been kind of building even since the Civil War. And particularly in the early 1900s, when people like W. Du Bois come on the scene. The NAACP is founded. People like Thurgood Marshall are lawyers who are fighting against this regime of Jim Crow. But it takes decades. It takes chipping away at it for a long time. We're going to talk about this a lot in our class this semester. So that's the great conundrum, or as historian William Link said, the paradox of Southern progressivism is that like there were some reforms that were actually kind of meant to address societal problems, but it was also at the same time that Jim Crow was being fastened onto the necks of Black people, um, particularly in the South, but through much of the country. And if you look at the experiences of um, Latina, Chicanx people in Texas or Southern California, particularly Asian kids, you see similar patterns happening in places like LA or San Francisco. Um, it's going to take a long time to address those things. So, Plessy v. Ferguson, very important. We're also looking at Jacobson v. Massachusetts, which has to do with vaccines. The Lochner decision, which basically says that freedom of contract, like if I want to work for 5 cents an hour digging ditches and I agree to do that with my employer, then the government doesn't have any role in saying, oh, there should be a minimum wage or workman's comp or something like that. It's just, I'm a worker, you're an employer, we make a deal. The government has no role in having anything to do with that. That's Lochner in 1905, very important. But then you get Mueller v. Oregon a few years later where, oh my God. Sorry about that. It was like an air horn. But the Supreme Court makes this, rather odd decision that like, there's freedom of contract, but where women are concerned, their hours of work can be regulated by the state or the government because women have like a special status as mothers and so forth. This was something progressives fought for really hard. In retrospect, it seems like really sexist. But they were trying to establish a precedent that like there could be something like a minimum wage or an 8-hour workday or something like that. If you worked more than 8 hours, you would have to get paid overtime, things like that. So this is why the progressive era is so interesting and so complicated. All of American history is complicated, but that's kind of where we're at right now. I wanted to just record this video so that you have a reference point. We're going to talk about this stuff in class, obviously, and we also have our first paper assignment that's up on our class website, and we can talk about that and go over what we're looking for. But thank you for listening, and I will see you on the flip side. This is Radio Free Gastonia. Dr. Alex Dave Cummings, aka Naima Day, signing off. Thank you. All right. Have a great day. Bye.